At this time, we will hear from the distinguished delegate from Syria.
Notwithstanding the fact that it is not legally binding and in spite of cultural, religious, and economic differences among countries worldwide. Wikipedia defines human rights as the basic rights and freedoms to which all humans are entitled, often held to include the right to life and liberty, freedom of thought and expression, and equality before the law. This definition is embodied in the first two articles of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The universal relevance of the UDHR cannot be undermined. In fact, approximately 60 years ago, 58 member states of the United Nations, which collectively represents a range of ideologies, political systems, religious, cultural, and economic backgrounds, penned a living document on human rights, reflective and inclusive of all diversities, to protect the rights of all people everywhere. The membership of the UN has since grown to 192, and the UDHR has been embraced by all member states. Since its inception, numerous commendations have been publicly lauding the UDHR as a document that is universally relevant. Former US President Ronald Reagan stated that this document is more than just words. It's a global testament of humanity, a standard by which any humble person can stand in judgment of any government on earth. In Syria, now more than ever, there is an urgent need to embrace the universal relevance of the UDHR and all that it represents. Syria presents a complex bureaucracy with overarching security concerns, endemic corruption, currency restrictions, a lack of modern financial services and communication, a weak legal system, and one whose foreign policy often hinders peace and development. Syria is a republic under a military regime with virtually absolute authority in the hands of the president, who, together with counsel from his ministers, high-ranking members of the ruling Ba'ath Party, and a relatively small circle of security advisors, make key decisions regarding foreign policy, national security, internal politics, and the economy. Citizens do not have the right to change their government. The government uses its vast powers to prevent any organized political opposition, and there have been very few anti-government manifestations. This is in direct contravention of Article 21 under the UDHR, which states that the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections. The powerful role of the security services in government, which often extends beyond security matters, is partly a consequence of the state of emergency that has been in place almost continuously since 1963. The government justifies martial law because of the state of war with Israel and past threats from terrorist groups. There is credible evidence that security forces continue to use torture. Former prisoners, detainees, and the London-based Syrian Human Rights Organization reported that torture methods included administering electrical shocks, pulling out fingernails, forcing objects into the rectum, beating, sometimes while the victim is suspended from the ceiling, hyperextending the spine, and bending detainees into the frame of a wheel and whipping exposed body parts. Continuing serious abuses included the use of torture in detention, poor prison conditions, arbitrary arrest and detention, prolonged detention without trial, fundamentally unfair trials in the security courts, an inefficient judiciary that suffered from corruption and at times political influence and infringement on privacy rights. The above described scenarios in direct contravention of all that the UDHR represents, particularly Articles 5 to 9. Article 5 of the UDHR states that no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. And Article 9, no one shall be subjected to arbitrarily arrest, detention, or exile. The government significantly restricts freedom of speech and of the press. The government strictly controls the dissemination of information and permits the little written or oral criticism of President Assad, his family, the Ba'ath Party, the military, or the legitimacy of the government. The government also does not permit the sectarian uses to be raised. Detention and beatings for individual expressions of opinion that violate these unwritten rules at times occurred. Communication by via the internet and cellular services is also monitored and in some cases blocked. This is in direct contravention of Article 19 of the UDHR, which states that everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This right includes freedoms to hold opinions and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media. In Syria, freedom of assembly is non-existent. Citizens may not hold demonstrations unless they obtain permission. This is in direct contravention of Article 20, which states that everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. The government placed some limits on freedom of movement. The government has restricted travel near the Golan Heights. Travel to Israel is illegal. Individuals have been denied permission to travel abroad on political grounds. The authorities may prosecute any person found attempting to emigrate or to travel abroad illegally, or who is suspected of having visited Israel. This is in direct contravention of Article 13, which states that everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence with the borders of each state and the right to leave any country. In terms of religion, the government has imposed restrictions in some areas. The Constitution that the president is be a Muslim. The Constitution requires that the president must be a Muslim. The government considers militant Islam a threat and follows closely the practice of its adherents. In concluding, as Howard Mumford Jones once said, if the equality of individuals and the dignity of man be myths, they are myths to which humanity must be committed. In light of the current state of affairs in Syria, more than ever, the significance of the UDHR cannot be understated. Like all of humanity the world over, the rights of each Syrian must someday be respected in accordance with the fundamental entitlements laid out in the UDHR. Thank you.
In 1998, Iran's foreign minister, Kamal Karazi, asked for a revision of the Declaration, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Mr. President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, fellow delegates, we are faced today with a great opportunity to fix a problem and to satisfy the needs of everyone, both Eastern and Western. We have the chance now to take another look at the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The world can now take into account the beliefs and values of everyone instead of only those who sat in the seats of power 60 years ago. Today I sit before you, a representative of the Sudanese government and our honorable leader, President Omar al-Bashir, not to celebrate the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, but instead to use these times as an opportunity to make this declaration truly universal. It is worth remembering today that the so-called Universal Declaration on Human Rights was originally drawn up by two lawyers, John Humphrey, former director of the United Nations Human Rights Division, and René Cassin, the chief legal advisor for Charles de Gaulle, a Canadian and a Frenchman. There is no way that the interests of the whole world can be considered through two men from Western backgrounds. In fact, we can find much more evidence of bias in the Declaration if we examine it more carefully. Take, for example, Article 29. This article states that the Declaration is relevant for a, quote, democratic society, end quote, and demonstrates that it is a declaration that reflects the purposes and principles of the United Nations. We all know that the UN is a respectable organization, but also an organization heavily influenced by Western nations, such as the United States, France, and Great Britain, who hold different ideals and values to those we in Sudan hold dear. What is more, they do not even respect their own universal principles. In this connection, I point out that even Human Rights Watch Executive Director in 2005 commented after the USA's actions of torture in the Abu Ghraib prison that this breaking of international human rights law, quote, poses a different kind of challenge because the abuser is so powerful, end quote. This is an obvious recognition of the fact that bias is present in the international arena. This is why, in 1990, 45 foreign ministers of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, including Sudan's, decided to implement the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam. The OIC has now 57 member states. Obviously, Sudan is not alone in respect to the view that the Universal Declaration on Human Rights is indeed not universal. Furthermore, Ali Uthman, Vice President of Sudan, directs us to yet another issue with the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. He states, the jihad is our way, and we will not abandon it, and will keep its banner high. The jihad, a substantial belief in the religion we follow, does not follow the same guidelines put forth by the Declaration. For instance, Article 14, Part 1 of the UDHR states that everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. According to our beliefs and the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam, Sudan cannot allow this to take place. If the person is seeking asylum from persecution, from a crime against the Sharia and Jihad law, we cannot allow it. We, the Republic of Sudan, suggest several steps be taken to correct this biased document. We propose that 5 members of the UN from each of the 5 major regions of the world be appointed to a committee to assist in a revision of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. These members should have the interest and knowledge and belief in each region, the members of this committee being re-elected regionally every 3 years. Finally, we propose that the declaration not be produced until each country is satisfied with the stipulations made. When the UDHR was first created, 8 countries abstained from supporting it. This is unacceptable. Everyone from Khartoum to New York should be completely satisfied and content with every right in the Declaration for it to truly live up to its name, universal. Thank you, and assalamu alaikum.
Exporter of the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen. My country's history is one that has been littered with rich and ambivalent regional and international relationships, which is born of opportunity.